When I first played through the story of Mae Borowski, at around 14 or 15, she was just a cool, well-written and interesting character. I enjoyed the story, but it didn't hit a chord with me. I couldn't really relate to any of her struggles. At that point, I wasn't old enough to have had any experience with the key problem that the character is facing. However, recently, I started to replay the game, and as a 17-year-old on the verge of becoming an adult, the story hit me so much differently. And now I think I can finally explain how much the game means to me, and what the character of Mae means to me. Mae Borowski returns home after a breakdown in her university. She was left completely overwhelmed by the experience of being thrust into university, and she just wants to return to the life that she once had. She tries to act like a teenager again, tightrope walking electricity lines, goofing off with her old friends, and trying her best to avoid confronting her problems, trying to hide from the questions that people have, to shield herself from the disappointment that she knows she's brought to everyone. But she can't. Even though it's the same town, with the same buildings and the same people, it feels like it's only an off-color imitation of the Possum Springs of her childhood. People are subtly disappointed in her. Even her friends can't be there for her like they used to. Greg and Angus try to accommodate her, but they're moving on with their lives. They're growing up, and they don't have time to hang out with Mae like they used to. Greg has a job and a good future before him, and he can't risk screwing that up. He knows that he can't hide from the fact that he's an adult now, but Mae refuses to learn that, and she tries to turn back the clock. And throughout the game, this immaturity on Mae's part causes the resentment towards her to bubble over into actual anger. This is shown most strongly in Bea. Bea hasn't had the opportunity to go to college. She's stuck in a horrible little apartment, barely scraping by and getting yelled at by her dad, despite the fact that she's doing the work to keep them going. To her, the opportunity that Mae has is like a fantasy. Bea sees Mae, and all she sees is someone who took what Bea had been longing for her whole life and tossed it away, without even really seeming to care. And Mae lacks the emotional maturity to really understand this, and so she continuously says things that really piss Bea off without even knowing it. Things like, "Man, screw college," as opposed to the actual reason of her suffering from severe mental issues in uni. Mae saying "screw college" is something that a rebellious teenager would say, but it completely invalidates Bea and drives her to almost hate Mae in a way. And I think that Bea and Greg both on some level want the best for Mae. Greg wants to recreate her old world and give her a last taste of childhood, while Bea wants to shake Mae awake and tell her to grow up, that her life cannot be the same. I think they represent the diverging paths facing Mae right now, either dragging herself into adulthood or retreating into immaturity. But even Greg can't keep helping Mae out, and he will have to leave her eventually. And I think this represents how it's not a viable option to shrug off responsibility forever. On a larger level, I think that this is a struggle that many young people have when they're on the verge of adulthood. Up to that point, many people's teenage years haven't been pleasant. They're filled with stress and turmoil as you try and deal with things changing so rapidly, and everything seeming so strange and confusing, and you just have to cope with the difficulty of figuring out who you are and who you want to be. And just as you've gotten used to feeling like that, and old enough to feel like you've gotten used to it, you begin having to prepare to have your safety lines cut off and being tossed into the adult world, where once again things are frightening and uncertain. Sure, you have your whole life ahead of you, but that just means you have your whole life to screw up now. I know that a lot of people are really excited about entering adulthood, but many, including myself and Mae too, are just scared of all the pressure that's now being placed on our shoulders all of a sudden. You're being told now's the time to be an adult. You have to grow up, live by yourself, and there's no one to blame for your screw-ups but you. You have to leave your family and friends, to start life entirely anew. Fleeing to safe familiarity is something tons of people have an urge to do in this situation. But the game doesn't shy away from pointing out the aspect of selfishness in this escapism. Mae's parents are very understanding, but she knows that there's a lingering resentment in them that pours out when her mom begins having a go at her one morning, about how she's let down the whole family, how she's squandered the life that her mum and her dad worked so hard to build for her. And that scene in particular really hit me, because up till that point, I'd been mostly floating along with May, having fun and exploring. When her mum goes off on her, I was completely taken aback. I hadn't even really considered the kind of stress that May was putting her parents under. While I and May had been chilling out, they were watching their daughter stagnate and throw off becoming an adult just so that she could waste her life away. And I can't blame them for thinking that way. All they see is May not giving a shit. She won't explain herself, so that's the conclusion they draw. And again, he is in that same situation. She didn't have a choice. She didn't have the option to be scared of adulthood because it was forced on her. She had to put aside her aspirations for the good of her family. So why can't May do the same? And that's part of why the world that May comes back to can never be the same as the one she once knew. And as I played the game, I started thinking, what right do I have to complain about my own issues? What gives me the right to moan about this when others would never be able to have what I do? I mean, I saw May, and I saw some of the things I'm scared of being. Someone who embarrasses themselves regularly. A person who people care about but don't really want around. Someone who often comes off as kind of unreasonable, but doesn't even realize it. And recently I've become more and more nervous that I'll end up in the situation that May's in. I'm going to be 18 in 5 months, and I'm terrified of becoming a burden to my family. I'm terrified of not being able to cope and disappointing everyone. I'm scared that I won't be able to meet my family without feeling like they're thinking what a disappointment I am, and wondering why I don't just grow up already. I know that, like May, if I fail, if I can't handle what happens next in my life, then I'll just be a loser to many people. May really encompasses a lot of my own fears, because I don't feel ready for adulthood. I don't feel ready for that responsibility. Maybe that's cowardly, I don't know. But I do know that one of the scariest things about it is the way I know I'll be scrutinized by everyone. And I think this mindset is most exemplified by the town cult, who sacrifices delinquents to knock off the Lovecraftian outer god. While I think these cultists primarily represent people who are desperately grasping at the past at the expense of the future, I feel that they also seem like a representation of how strangers will impose their views of you, on how you should behave and how you should live your life. Maybe that's a stretch, but I think it works within the context of the game. People who will scoff at you as a failure if you don't check one of the boxes on their success checkbook. The cult goes way further than dismissal, and veers into actually trying to control who gets to live in their town, ignoring who the person actually is and what they're going through. They only spare May in the end because she's related to her hard-working parents. If it weren't for that, they would have killed May without a thought, because she didn't fulfill their expectations. And the game shows how negative a thing this is, and how it harms people. It's really, really easy to fall into that way of thinking, and to beat yourself up over it, but that will just send you spiraling into self-loathing and solve none of your problems. And the mindset of staying in a career or a uni course or a relationship or whatever, just because those close to you would be disappointed if you didn't, is a really corrosive fear that forces you into things that you hate, just for the sake of keeping up your reputation with people. May's parents' anger is justified, but at the same time, and I think they, know that ultimately the most important thing is that their daughter is safe and happy and mentally well. And that's what's such a comfort about me. She's the person who I'm terrified I might become, but despite that, she can still fall back on people. She can still be cared for, not as a burden, but as a friend. And it's nice to see this character, even though she's fictional, struggling with these things too. And the fact that she's connected so strongly with many others is a relief, because it means that many other people understand these feelings too. And it reminds me that I'm not alone in these feelings. If you're feeling similarly, well, you're not alone either. I think Night in the Woods is a game that I would recommend to anyone who's struggling with entering adulthood, or anyone in general, not just because of May, but because of all the characters. There's such an array of personalities, struggles, and outlooks that I'm sure that whoever you are, whatever age you are, and whatever you're going through, you'll find one that resonates with you. The ending that I think the game comes to is that time in this transition period is uncertain and ugly, and because of that, you should take it day by day. Sometimes it's okay to just take a break and play some music with your friends, and those friends and those family members will eventually understand you. B comes around to sympathize with and reconnect with May. It shows that the opinions of random strangers doesn't mean anything because they don't know you. Even if things can't be the same, you can still make it into something good again. I think that's a great way to look at this. You can't freeze yourself forever. You can't ignore your problems. But it's okay to take a break from all this stress. You don't deserve to be constantly scrutinized, and you deserve to take care of yourself. I know that's a bit of an annoyingly overly positive message to take away from this, and that many people, like B, and like May's parents, don't have that opportunity. But after you come back from a difficult time, wherever it may be, it doesn't make you entitled or self-centered to focus on making sure that you're doing okay. And no one should judge you for it. Sometimes you can just play guitar and eat pizza for the afternoon. And sometimes the problems can wait till tomorrow. And sometimes that's okay.